America's secret war. Drones are now killing thousands a year in countries around the globe. But is the use of robots in warfare ethical? And what is the true extent of this covert campaign? Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Absent Justice with me, Moazzam Begg. During 2010, the CIA's drone war in Pakistan killed as many as 1,000 people. Drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, also regularly attacked suspected militants in Yemen and Somalia. Despite evidence of hundreds of civilian deaths, few US officials have publicly criticized the campaign or its rapid expansion under President Barack Obama. But what rules apply to their use? And aren't these simply assassinations, which is illegal under US law? And what evidence does the CIA have that the victims are militants? We'll be discussing these questions in a minute, but first a report by Huria Al-Haddad.
American Predator drones have become a controversial focus of the Obama administration's counterterrorism strategy. The drones' use abroad, particularly in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan, has become an increasing cause for concern for many human rights organizations and lawyers. According to human rights group Reprieve, the use of drones has increased under US President Barack Obama. In 8 years, former President George Bush sanctioned the use of 42 drone strikes, yet President Obama, who's only been in office for 3 years, has sanctioned thousands of attacks since he was elected in 2009. So why is the president so keen on drones? Many security and political analysts say Obama is more reluctant to take prisoners like his predecessor, because he wants to avoid the embarrassment of another Guantanamo Bay. Drones are also politically cost-free, as they avoid American casualties. According to the US military, since the drone program accelerated in August 2010, several hundred so-called militants have been killed in targeted assassinations. But various human rights organizations have reported otherwise, saying the majority of victims killed are indeed civilians, and there are pictures to prove it. Despite the evidence of hundreds of civilian deaths, few US officials have publicly criticized the campaign or its expansion under President Barack Obama. What's more, an explosion in aerial drones is transforming the way America fights and thinks about its wars.
I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by leading human rights lawyer Clive Stafford Smith. Clive is the founder of Reprieve, and to date he has helped secure the release of 65 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay. More recently, he has spoken out against the use of unmanned aerial drones. We're very pleased to be joined by him on Absent Justice. Welcome, Clive. Clive, before we get into all of the nitty-gritty of drones and Guantanamo, let's get into our own little history, which is the first time you and I met. Describe that experience to me.
Well, I think there are two sides to any conversation, Moazzam, and I had, of course, been in touch with Gareth Pearce here in England before I came and got a letter of introduction, because you wouldn't know me from Adam, and so she had sent a letter saying that I'd done a lot of death penalty cases, and it never occurred to me that that would really freak you out, that, I'd bring a letter and you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get executed. But it was in that bizarre place, Camp Echo, and first they gave me a familiarization tour before I was allowed to see you, and they showed me what a cell was like and the comfort items that you were meant to have, which were ridiculous things like a little finger toothbrush and stuff. And the only real sort of extraneous thing beyond clothing and towels and soap was a game of checkers, dominoes effectively. And I looked at this and I said to the guy who was showing us around, who's he meant to play with? I mean, he's in this cell by himself. Is he meant to play with himself? And the guy was sort of taken aback and said, I suppose so. But it's a surreal place. And then meeting you, I've got to say, big bad terrorist that you are, and it's very hard to take that seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is bizarre. It's the bizarre destiny or fate or whatever you want to call it. But that the first time I saw you was in an 8-foot by 6-foot cell, and the introduction letter that I had to you was about your capital cases that you worked on in the United States. And when I read it, Clive Stafford Smith, who's this person who's been working on death penalty cases, I thought, that's it, I've had it. There is no escape from Guantanamo. But since then, of course, you've set up Reprieve, you've been fighting for the rights of prisoners in Guantanamo. You've helped, I hope, secure the release of several prisoners, and several are still there.
But there's another aspect to our first meeting, which I think is very telling. I remember taking the notes of everything you said, and the ridiculous rule is that everything you said was classified, so I had to send my notes back to Washington to the secure facility. And all of this was about how you'd been abused and, some of the psychological problems you were facing after all the treatment you'd gone through. And because my theory was, I'm not talking to you about what they're accusing you of, I'm more interested in what they've done to you. And every single word of that was censored. And I asked these people in Washington, how can you censor this stuff? One of the things you had told me was how you'd witnessed a murder in Bagram. And how can that be censored? And they said, this is the methods and means of interrogation.
I remember that the bizarre irony of that is that I was released, but I'd given you some information that I then needed for the book that I was later to write. But you said to me that you couldn't give me that information that I'd given you because it was still classified. Right. And of course, that's still the case in Guantanamo, isn't it? That there's information that you're told by your clients that you can't discuss until it's been declassified 10 years
Well,
on.
In a way, it's got far worse. I went to see Shakarama 3 weeks ago in Guantanamo, and they're applying the rules far more rigorously because they've figured out that this is really embarrassing stuff that comes out of Guantanamo. So, what Shaka tells me, there's no threat to American national security in any way, but there is a threat to American embarrassment. And so they are censoring a lot more today, even than they did in the early days.
Now, you've been dealing with, of course, primarily in your life, the death penalty cases, then you moved on, or you still continue rather to deal with those cases. You moved on also to dealing with extrajudicial detention. Recently, you've been to Pakistan and you've been looking at the drone attacks and extrajudicial killing. What's brought you into this field? Why have you felt that this is something that's important? It's completely different from the prison systems that you've been dealing with. Why this move?
No, it's actually all the same thing. Look, with the death penalty in America, it's really all about singling out disproportionately African American people and saying that there's a crime problem and it's all their fault. And so you have a hate group that you really despise and you say if we execute them, that'll make the world better. And of course, that's all a total myth. It does no good to anybody to kill a few black people. Certainly doesn't solve the crime problem. Now, you transpose that to Guantanamo, and of course you actually were potentially facing the death penalty in Guantanamo. And instead of being a black person in Mississippi who's not given a free lawyer and so forth, you were a Muslim person in Guantanamo who wasn't even allowed a lawyer. So it was just one step worse, and instead of hating, African-American people, the hatred turned towards Muslims. Well, when Obama came to power, and I voted for him, and I will vote for him again, look at the alternative, but he was opposed to Guantanamo. One of the tragic ironies of that is that instead of taking prisoners and putting them in an awful place like Guantanamo Bay or Bagram, it's take no prisoners. There was this old thing 800 years ago when the Catholic Church didn't like a group of heretics called the Albigensians in the south of France, and they were attacking the city with the Albigensians in it, and the general asks the guy from the Inquisition, how do we know an Albigensian from a Catholic? And the Inquisition said, kill them all and God will know his own. And unfortunately, the process that we have now with Obama and drones is take no prisoners, just kill them. And if you think about, you would have been killed, right? They wouldn't have waited to see whether you were
Precisely, and this is the point, isn't it? Because you've just recently been in the northwest frontier region of Pakistan, and that's where a lot of the people...
I believe we've got away from the colonial name.
Well, okay, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is the correct terminology for it. But even so, that place, as you rightly said, used to be the place targeted for where people would be captured, sold for a bounty, like most of us were, but now they're being killed. What sort of evidence have you managed to gather about the numbers of people being killed in that region? And let's not forget it's taking place in Somalia and Yemen also, but particularly in that region, and the effects of it on the population that you've seen.
It's actually exactly the same, isn't it? The Americans are getting their intelligence in exactly the same way as they did with Guantanamo Bay, which is to pay bounties to local people. And so, I come along and I offer you a bounty and I say, if you point out a guy I should kill, I'll kill him and pay you $5,000. Now, from your perspective, you've got a choice. You can either finger someone who's really dangerous, which is going to be dangerous to you, or you can finger a nobody, which isn't going to be dangerous, and then you tag his car with a GPS signal. I blow him up and he's killed, and I release a press release saying that's 4 militants. we later find out that it's a couple of children who are going to see their auntie.
Now, what did you feel are the effects of this, or how are people feeling on the ground that you're talking to?
There's always a sort of 2% rump, but there's no question that 98% of the people in that area are vehemently against it. And I talked to a bunch of Maliks who I met in Peshawar just 10 days ago.
Landowners and...
Well, and they're the people who basically run the jirgas and are the elected public officials, if you will. And they were vehemently against it. And one of the saddest statements that I heard was this, that America, when there were the big floods, America was by far the biggest donor of aid, much bigger even than China to help Pakistani people out. And yet, they told me, despite this effort to show goodwill, Americans are the most hated people in the region, and there's one reason for that, and that's because of what we're doing in Waziristan. And it's not only criminal, it's just stupid. It just achieves nothing positive.
And is there in terms of the numbers, has there been any study done that you're aware of that's catalogued the exact numbers of people killed, maimed, and lost homes as a result?
Well, it's one of the great things. The most difficult aspects of this is transparency. I mean, there are very few war zones in the world where it's impossible to get in.
Right.
And journalists are embedded everywhere and so on and so forth. The difficulty with drones is that it makes warfare much easier on the people with drones, but there's no soldiers, there's no anyone. And so, as of the moment, for example, I've never been into Waziristan, no journalists go in. We have a project, though, which is a transparency project to try to get photographs of all the victims out and to get pieces of missiles. And I've got some very dramatic pictures of the missiles that actually killed particular children. Because what we're trying to do is prove what's going on, just prove the truth, not make anything up. And working with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, who are doing a great job, and their website has a lot of the best work on this, we're gradually beginning to show what the truth is. For now, we can prove, I think, pretty much beyond doubt, that at least 174 children have been killed by drones.
Oh my goodness.
And, well, the one that touched me the most, and I've got to say transformed this from a legal issue into an issue where I've got a bit of a vendetta against the people who are killing innocent folk there. By vendetta, I don't mean I'm going to do them harm, I just mean I'm going to bring the law down on them. Was last October the 28th, we had a meeting with a bunch of Waziri elders in Islamabad, and 80 people showed up. I was the token American, and I told them the American perspective. That
just so people don't get confused, you do have dual British
I've got dual
and
nationality. I get to apologize for Tony Blair and George Bush. But I tell them that we say we don't kill anyone innocent, and look, you didn't have to speak Pashto to understand their snorting. But one of the kids there was a guy called Tariq Aziz, who was 16 years old. And Tariq wanted to know what he could do to stop death raining down on his family. And, we were talking about the cameras, and they could take cameras, take pictures, and show what's happening. But I thought he was a bit young for that. 3 days later, the United States killed that child with a Hellfire missile. And he was driving to pick up his auntie with his, he was with his little cousin. And they killed him. And again, what happened there. That some informant tagged his car.
And I suppose these sort of things, knowing people. I remember seeing, I think the film 14 Days in May about one of your clients who was executed in the United States.
Executed 25 years ago, 2 days ago.
And then again, 25 years later, you have the case of Tariq Aziz. Somebody you know, somebody you see, somebody who wants to fight for the rights of others gets killed. How do you, Clive, I mean, the other famous Clive in that part of the world was Clive of India. Clive of Pakistan, how does Clive of Pakistan get received in Pakistan at a time when Americans and Britons of the Caucasian sort are not particularly welcome because of the policies of the government?
Look, I'm welcomed incredibly kindly in Pakistan. And, the first step towards reconciliation is to apologize. I mean, you've got to recognize you've done wrong, and you've got to say sorry. I find it unfathomable that the United States won't just apologize to Pakistan for killing all those soldiers. It was probably a mistake. They may not have meant to do it, but just say sorry. What's the big deal? And I apologize to everyone. I apologize to you, Moazzam, for what half of my half.
As long as you weren't responsible, we won't accept the apology.
No, you can accept it, but what we've got to do is try to fight to redress the imbalance. And, you know, the death penalty with Edward Johnson when he was killed, and he was innocent, he was an African-American kid who was 18, you know, that was terribly wrong, and I was trying to stop that. And it was all about hatred. And the same's true here today. We're doing the same thing again today in the name of hatred, and we just can't have that.
You received some sort of an award by the Pashtun tribesmen. Explain that. Why did they give you the award? And what was it, more importantly?
They were very sweet. It was these, you know, the Pashtun Maliks gave me a Pashtun Peace Award, which is a lovely thing. It has crossed big knives and a drone picture. It looks a bit more like a Pashtun War Prize than a Peace Prize. But it was incredibly kind of them.
Which is completely in tune, of course, with Obama receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Right?
Well, but you think I should go to war now to justify my prize. But anyway, it was very sweet of them. And it did make me think that one thing we're going to do in October is a more formal thing to initiate a real Pashtu Peace Prize. I think probably the first recipient ought to be Imran Khan, because of all the people in Pakistan, he's someone who has really fought for the folk who are the victims of this process.
Now, you spoke about taking a convoy with people across Waziristan to demonstrate their complete outrage at the drone strikes. What's that about?
Well, it's more about opening it up. Do forgive me, I'm afraid I came back from Pakistan with a little of the Raj's revenge. I'm not very well. But when we first came to Guantanamo, it was me and Joe Margulis, and Joe, who's a professor, said something I think was very wise, which is the essence of what was happening in Guantanamo was secrecy. And as long as the United States could pretend that they had really bad dudes in there, then, you know, they could pretend they were doing something good about this war on terror. And so our job was to open it up to transparent inspection, and if we opened it up, they would close it down because we'd reveal what rubbish it was. Exactly the same thing applies to Waziristan, that at the moment it's sealed off. And, you know, honestly, I think Obama believes this nonsense that he's told, that innocent people aren't being killed and that it's achieving something positive. And we've got to open it up to inspection. Now, if I just start walking towards Miran Shah, someone will kill me. But if we do it as a big peace rally, and we start, say, in Banu and start marching towards Miran Shah, then I don't think they will kill us. And frankly, what we've got to do is do that, to open up that area. And so everyone's welcome to come along.
And you'll probably get the protection of the tribes and or at least a non-hostility. What you have to try to secure is that you don't get struck by drone strikes.
But that's true. I met with the Maliks, and they're issuing me an invitation saying that they can protect me against anyone in Waziristan, because their position, which makes sense to me, is there are no extremists who are, you know, the Taliban from Afghanistan, if you view them as extremists. They're not in Waziristan, they're in Afghanistan. I mean, the Americans only control about 5% of Afghanistan. There's plenty of space for the people who oppose them there. So they're not there. And the Maliks tell me that, you know, we're quite safe from anyone there. They say they can't protect me against the American drones. Well, I'll write to the CIA and I'll say, please don't kill me. Will you please assure me that you won't kill me? And, you know, I dare say.
You mentioned sort of trying to redress the balance. What are you asking people to do in the United Kingdom, people who are watching this program? What would you encourage them to do in order to try to put pressure on whoever they need to stop this?
We have to stand together. I know it's intimidating, and it's actually much easier for me as a sort of privileged white male to deal with these things, even when occasionally one gets threatened. But we've got to stand together to make this work, or if we don't stand together, it all falls apart. And we need to bring litigation here in Britain on behalf, for example, of the British people who are being threatened with these drones. And I know it's intimidating, but we've got to do it. And Britain, as we saw in the whole torture issue with Binyam Mohammed's case and so forth, the British courts are much more likely to do justice than the American courts. And we need to bring a series of cases here because we know the British intelligence are providing information to the US to kill people because they were stupid enough to boast about it in the Times. So we can sue them here for doing that, and we can put a stop to it. And what that's going to do is have huge, you know, repercussions around the world, because the British courts will say this is a criminal offence. There is no justification for what's going on in Waziristan. And the closest parallel is actually President Nixon's bombing of Laos and Cambodia back in 1969. And you know what came of that. And the same thing's happening today. So we can stop it, but only if we all work together.
There's something disturbing.
Can I just say something? Please,
Yes.
the people watching, we need you to work with cage prisoners too, and work with us to make that happen.
Thank you for that plug. There's something really disturbing that I came across. I find it extremely disturbing that several British citizens have been killed in drone strikes. We believe it suggests that the British were involved in one way or another because, especially, their nationality was removed before the strikes were done.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what's the process that's allowing this to happen. Are we still, even after the cases of Binyam and the Guantanamo ones and the secret renditions and Abdul Hakim Bilhaj, which is from the past government, do you think it could be potentially still going on where secret evidence is being passed in order to take away the rights of British citizens by the British government?
Let's not beat about the bush. It's not that it could be. I know it is. It is going on. And in fact, we're suing them this week on just a policy issue, which is the question of whether the British government has a policy for sharing information with the Americans that results in killing people in Waziristan. We know they're doing it because they said so. So the question is what their policy is. And whatever their policy is, it's when did you stop beating your wife? It's illegal regardless. If they don't have a policy, then they're crazy. If they do have a policy, then they're criminal. So either way, they lose. And what they're going to do is they're going to fight us tooth and nail. And indeed, they've assigned 4 QCs. I imagine every time they have coffee to discuss the case, it costs the taxpayer £1,000. And, this just shows how paranoid they are. And, you've got to remember, those people who think we can do nothing, that we can. With Guantanamo Bay, people told us it was the most powerful man on earth who wanted to do this, George Bush. He lost that battle, and they're going to lose this battle too because they're just wrong.
Well, Guantanamo is still open. The drone strikes are still taking place. But we have people like yourself and your team and everybody else with you that are fighting for the rights of people that are still held there. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. If you'd like to know more about Clive and his work, please visit the website of reprieve.co.uk. I would like to thank Clive for joining us, the production staff, and you at home for watching. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time, inshallah, for our next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.